Good morning, everybody. Now, you may not have known this, but we have campuses of our church all over the state. You probably didn't know, did you? I mean, we're a huge, multinational organization. What I mean by that is actually there's a lot of people who are at their cabin this weekend, but they are watching online. So that kind of counts, right? So say hi, everybody. We're glad that you guys are online watching us participating. Glad that you're here today. I'm really glad that you stuck around and you're spending your Memorial Day weekend with us. 1 Corinthians chapter 9. 1 Corinthians chapter 9. This is what Phoebe just read. I just wanted to get in our heads, okay? Lodge in our brains. I have become all things to all people, Paul says, so that by all possible means I may save some. I do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings. Early on in my ministry here, did youth ministry for 13 years, and you're always trying to find that point of connection with kids, with students. You're always trying to find that thing, and there was this one. He wasn't actually one of the youth group kids. He was a young adult, but I was still trying to figure out how do I connect with this guy, and just always looking for that opportunity. One evening, and this doesn't happen a ton, but I got a cold, and I thought, man, I would just want to knock myself out, sleep through the night, wake up feeling better. And I've taken NyQuil maybe once in my life. And this is the sleepy time kind of NyQuil, you know what I'm talking about? So it was probably 9 o'clock at night, took some sleepy time NyQuil, and again, my body's not used to this, so I'm just going to be passed out, maybe hopefully before I can make it to the bedroom. And I get a text from this kid that I've been trying to connect with. And he says, hey, I happen to have a guest pass to my gym, and I'd like to work out. Would you come join me? And I'm like, are you serious? I didn't say this. I've been thinking this. Are you serious? It's 9 o'clock at night. I mean, all good people are asleep at this point. What are you talking about? Working out, going to work out at 9 o'clock at night. But what do I say? Yes, of course. I would love to do that. That would be great. He had a membership to this pretty fancy gym, and I don't work out very often either. This wasn't something I was oh yeah, I'll just get my rip on. I don't even know the language. I don't know. That didn't sound right. So I don't want to do this, but the kids are already in bed. I'm not leaving Kareem with any extra responsibilities. He's got a guest pass. Really want to connect. I want to be all things to all people. So I meet him at the gym. I say, sure. I get there. Now, remember, I had taken sleepy time NyQuil. So I'm feeling a little bit, but whatever. I'll push through. How hard it can be. Mind over matter. And he hands me this shake when I get there. Now, not a milkshake. That would be awesome. But he hands me this, workout shake. And I just assume it's a protein thing. Be all things to all people. So I chug this shake. Turns out it was a protein/energy shake. So I'd taken sleepy time NyQuil, and I had just taken an energy drink. I know. What was awesome? I'm no doctor, but the energy boost NyQuil thing is no good. For about 30 seconds, I felt like Captain America. You know what I mean? I was like, God, I'm just doing great. And then for about 30 hours, I felt like Steve Rogers pre-super serum, when he was all scrawny. That's how I felt like I was going to pass out. No joke, I spent most of the time that we had together in the men's bathroom, in a stall, not using the bathroom, but just sitting there, just trying to avoid him and working out. And I had my head leaned against the wall of the thing. I'm trying to be all things to all people. I could console myself with the fact that if I were to die from this, at least I died trying to live out a Bible verse. I mean, God has to you're right in, Patrick. We're in this series called In Minnesota as It Is in Heaven. Of course, that comes from the Lord's Prayer, where Jesus taught his followers to pray on earth as it is in heaven. And we wanted to get a little bit more specific for our purposes. And of course, we want this to be true everywhere, whatever state people live in. But in particular, we meet in Woodbury. We meet in Minnesota. We have people that live, I know, in Wisconsin too. We have people that watch online from different places. But this prayer that it would be this local thing that God does, that God works through us in Minnesota, that he establishes his kingdom like we just sang about. So we talked about last week that God is on a mission to restore shalom to the world. And shalom is one of those, it's not even a churchy word. It's a Hebrew word that we might not be super familiar with. In fact, the name Jerusalem comes from Jerusalem. It means city of peace. But we talked about last week how the word shalom is so much more all-encompassing than peace. It's just that perfect, contented state of satisfaction that humans long for. And that God is on a mission to restore the world to that perfect state that he created. That's what it's about. And of course, we talked about we can participate in a real and necessary way. That we participate in this mission. And we go from landfills to gardens. You remember that imagery from last week? That a place where kids were picking through the trash to find enough to sustain themselves that had been turned into this beautiful garden. And that's the picture of what God is doing in people's lives and in the world. That God is trying to redeem the brokenness and the hurt and the pain and the trauma, and he's making something beautiful out of it, and we get to play a role in that. We get to participate. What a beautiful idea. Or I told you about feeding, my parents' friends feeding homeless people pancakes under the overpass. You know, you could drive by that and you could say, what's wrong with our government? Why don't they do something? When somebody should create a program? Or you can go get a griddle and some pancakes and you can feed some people. And we tend to curse the darkness rather than light a candle. It's such a motivating idea. I know some people just were like, I am ready to go. I'm ready to bring shalom. I'm ready to establish the kingdom. You wanted to bust into your office on Monday morning like the Kool-Aid man saying, let's do this. This is the kingdom place now. I'm here. I'm ready to do God's work, God's purpose here. So we talked about the two-part prayer that we needed to pray. God, where are you working to restore shalom in the world? And how can I play a part? How can I join? You ever been super excited to start a project? I'm kind of a leap before you look kind of guy. You ever been super excited to start a project, but then lost a lot of your enthusiasm after you started? You're like, today's the day. I'm cleaning that closet that's been a nightmare for so long. I'm feeling it. I've got a burst of energy. I just took an energy protein shake, and you get in that closet and you pull everything out and you're like, this is going to be good. Once you get everything out of that closet and spread in the living room or bedroom or hallway, you're like, man, I'm feeling a little sleepy now. I want to take a little nap. I'm not sure I want to finish this project. You know what I'm talking about? I think we do with a variety of things. I'm going to repaint the family room, and you move all the furniture, and you paint everything. You're like, I don't know that I have the energy anymore. I'm going to be part of God's shalom project in the world. I'm excited as long as I'm just sitting in church on a Sunday morning. I don't actually have to do anything. Heart gets pumped. I get to get excited. But then, got kids' games this weekend. We got work deadlines. We got family stuff. And the energy drink of God's mission doesn't necessarily mix well with the NyQuil of real life. Unless an important shift is made for all of us. Unless we understand something different about ourselves. And this is it. We're going to give you the secret, and then we're going to explore what that looks like. If God is on a mission in the world, God is actively working, trying to shape the world and create meaning and purpose and goodness and beauty and truth in the world, and we have a role in that mission, that means that you are a missionary. Yeah, I didn't think you'd be excited about that. I knew Steve would be excited about that, so I appreciate that that's right. But everybody else is like, that's exactly what I am not. That's why I'm not living overseas somewhere, doing something else somewhere. Now, you have to understand, this is probably not what you think, but you are a missionary. Now, real quick, let me say this, that in some corners of the globe, believe it or not, missionaries can have a negative reputation. Did you know that? Some of you are like, yeah, I knew that. I don't necessarily like missionaries. They're weird. Missionaries are weird, right? My parents were missionaries. See what I mean? Steve was a missionary. The shoe fits, right? In some corners of the world, missionaries do have a negative reputation, and sometimes it's deserved. Gandhi famously said, I like your Christ, not your Christians. And his first experience with Christians was missionary standing outside of his school where he grew up. He said in his autobiography, pouring contempt or pouring abuse on the Hindu people. They were just railing against the people themselves. And he's like, yeah, I'm not sure that this is good. And growing up, I grew up in the mission field too. You saw it all, right? You saw it all. I was chatting with my mom this week about some of their experiences with a variety of missionaries, and she talked about interacting with missionaries who made fun of the people that they were there to help. They would mock them and make fun of them. And you're like, that's crazy. Yeah, it's crazy. People are crazy sometimes. There's shocking, I know, there are some missionaries who would take money from support from the States, and then they would go on the mission field, and they would do nothing. They would live great, but they wouldn't do any work. They didn't have any accountability. That does happen. I know some people sometimes are suspicious of that. There are some missionaries who just totally disregard culture and try to recreate little mini versions of the American church, little franchises of the American church without regard for the people and the customs and the traditions that are already there. There are missionaries that wouldn't learn the language of the country they were going to. Wouldn't learn the language. Now, do you know how much impact those kinds of missionaries were having on the mission field they were serving? Nothing. Yeah, nothing. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Other missionaries were incredible, inspirational people. People that you want to model your life after. My parents went on the mission field and didn't take support from other churches. My dad worked overseas to support the family and then used his job as a mission field. Wild, huh? The family I showed you a picture of has been a few months ago. They lived over in Taiwan for 55 years, and they started an orphanage. And the Bev Skiles took care of the infants. She would sometimes have 3, 4, 5 infants at a time, well into her 70s. You imagine one infant is exhausting. Imagine 7 infants, and you're 60 years old. You're like, who are these people? They're incredible people. A lot of missionaries. In fact, most missionaries are like that. They don't make these kinds of sacrifices just for fun. They do it because they deeply care about being missionaries. Hudson Taylor is a famous missionary. You may have heard of him, may have not. In order to be a missionary, he was going to be on mission to China. He went to medical school, not missionary school. And he went to medical school because he realized that that was going to be a more effective way of loving and serving people in the places he was going than actually getting a seminary degree. He went to medical school. And pretty interesting. And one of the things that's important to know, too, with a guy like that is he understood that working or serving or mission work wasn't just about conversions, but it was about shalom. It was about helping the whole person. One of the cool things that he did, it may not be cool now, but he actually dressed like the locals. Today, we're so sophisticated, we'd call that cultural appropriation. But at the time, they loved it. They appreciated it. Because the missionaries that they knew were coming in trying to make everybody dress like the Americans. And they appreciated someone who came in and accepted their culture and their customs. Not only did he learn Chinese, which I can tell you from experience is very hard. He learned 5 sub-dialects that he was fluent in Chinese. 5 Chinese sub-dialects, so he could be effective where he was. He even translated the Bible into one of them. So, yes, there are bad missionaries, but that shouldn't allow us to have a negative reputation. I've been to restaurants where I found a hair in my food, and I still eat out. In fact, I actually still finished the meal, and I found the hair in the food, because that's how I am. I don't let a bad experience ruin the entire thing. So maybe there are the concept of missionaries for you, maybe a little, you're not certain about it, but you have to understand that there is so much good to be done. There's so much good in the world. The harder part of this idea is not only are you a missionary, but you are a missionary. That might be the harder part of this idea to swallow. There's a statue of a guy named Giordano Bruno. They didn't have the term for this, but he was an atheist from the 15th century. And they built a statue for him. And you're like, well, why would they build a statue for an atheist? It was so shocking that there was someone who didn't just believe, that they were like, this guy stands out. He was a skeptic. They used a different term for him because there just wasn't the category for atheist. That didn't exist. Every single person you knew just accepted it as fact that God was real and worked in the world. Everybody that you knew in the 15th century, except for this guy. This guy was like, I'm not so sure. And it was such a surprise. It was so countercultural that they built a statue to him. It still exists in Rome to this day. At one point in our history, for 1,500 years, in the West, Christianity was just assumed. People just assumed that's the way it was. Everyone believed in God. Everyone went to church. Everyone claimed to be a Christian. Everything in society was geared around church and church life. Christianity was the culture for about 1,500 years, maybe even slightly longer. All the great art from 400 or 500 years ago was Christian art. All the great music from 400 or 500 years ago was Christian music. Handel's Messiah, it was all religious. Everything that everybody did and believed and the air that they breathed was this religious Christian. Lots of people were cultural Christians, but it was Christianity. If you have been alive for, I suppose anywhere from about 30 to, up, you have seen a shift in our culture. This is a shift that's been taking place in other parts of the world, in the Western world, but it's certainly taking place in our culture over the last 30 to 35 years. If you're about my age, which is pretty young, if you're my age, when you were a kid, Sunday mornings were kind of left alone. Nobody scheduled things on Sunday mornings. Wednesday nights were kind of left alone. You rarely had baseball games, soccer things on Sunday mornings or Wednesday nights. It's not true anymore at all. Not at all. Because culturally, our world, our cultural world has shifted away from being culturally Christian. Meaning it's no longer assumed that everybody just goes to church or believes in Jesus or any of that. America was culturally Christian, and it is rapidly becoming not. That makes some people nervous. Some people are like, well, I like the way it used to be when everything just kind of worked for me. And the culture wars that you hear about, sometimes you read about, sometimes you see, they're about this fear, this particular fear. I don't like it that Starbucks didn't put Merry Christmas on their cups. I don't like that. It doesn't make me comfortable. I don't like that. I don't like what I see, the trend in the culture. That's how they feel about it. But I want you to know two things about this. This is super important. Cultural Christianity may make us feel comfortable and safe, but it is a mirage. It may make you feel comfortable that everybody around you pretends to believe, but it's a mirage if it's not authentic and real. It doesn't matter. Who cares what Starbucks puts on their cups? And I know I'm using that as an example because it's so silly. Wasn't really a controversy. It was kind of a drummed up thing. But who cares about that? We get so upset that the culture around us isn't pretending to be Christian. I don't want the culture around us to pretend to be Christian. That's not what I'm looking for. I want the kingdom to advance and people's hearts to actually be transformed. Not for things to conform to my comfort and sense of safety. We don't want that. You don't want our culture to be culturally Christian just so you feel good. You act like you do, and sometimes you vote like you do, but that's not really what you want. That's not what God wants. God doesn't want it mandated so everybody just pretends to go along because that's the way current culture is. We don't want that. But this is important. And by the way, you don't want to defend that cultural Christianity. But the second thing is the more that cultural Christianity fades, the more the authentic thing, the real thing, can shine out, can be distinguished, can be something substantive and real. And so if your faith is real, the more culture moves away from looking like you and sounding like you and acting like you and prioritizing like you, the more you can shine. It's an opportunity. And I know we despair and we bite our fingernails and we wring our hands and we're really nervous about the shift our culture has taken, but it's an opportunity for us to advance the kingdom in reality. That's what we want. There's another missionary by the name of Leslie Newbigin, and I finished a book of his recently, but he was a British missionary in India from 1936 to 1974. This is super cool. Doesn't matter, but it's super cool. He retired from the mission field in 1974, and he returned from India to Birmingham, England by bus. Yeah, I tried to map this on Google Maps, and Google Maps was like, that's not a thing. You can't do that. There's no way to take a transit from India to England, but he managed, this is back in 1974, by bus. He and his wife, 2 suitcases, by bus. That's pretty incredible. I guess he was ready to retire. I just thought that was amazing. And the question is, do you think British society had changed much between 1936 and 1974? Yeah. Did American society change much in that time frame? Yes. I don't remember much about 1936, but yes. I don't remember much about 1974, to be honest, but I'm assuming it changed a lot. And Leslie Newbigin got back to England, and he realized, he's like, oh, wait a second. I was a missionary here in this pluralist society, and I had to re-engineer the way that I thought about how to interact with the culture so that I could be effective for God. You know what? I'm also a missionary here in this pluralist society, and I have to re-engineer the way I think and interact with the culture in order to be effective for God. It was the same thing. It was the same mental switch that he had to make, and he started to realize, wait a second, I think the church has always been full of missionaries no matter where they are. And he started to write books about it, and that's what actually he became famous and effective for, was helping people understand that they are missionaries. That in the culture in which they live, they are missionaries because God has saved them from out of where they were and has called them to be a light in those communities. And he's like, oh, we don't have to go overseas to do this work any longer. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 22, Paul understands this. I have become all things to all people, so that by all possible means I may save some. I do this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings. One of the spiritual epiphanies that has to happen for us, has to happen for you, has to happen for me. And you can be hesitant, arms crossed, reticent about this idea, but at some point, to be effective for the kingdom, you have to realize that you are a missionary. That's who you are. That's your identity. It's a shift, and it's hard for us to accept, but you are a missionary called by God to the community in which you live, to the workplace in which you live, to the classroom in which you study, to the office in which you interact, into the neighborhood and where God has given you a place to live. You're a missionary to that place. Now, some of you are still like, well, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh, Bruce, that's so nice. Bruce is an elder. What servant hearts these guys have. I've been preaching for 20-some years. I've never knocked over my podium before. You guys got to witness history. That was history right there. Yeah, thank you. So what was I saying? I was saying something awesome. We'll just edit that on the online service, I'm sure. We can use CGI or something like that. You know, the funny thing is, I'm like, Patrick, you should be embarrassed about that. I'm not at all. Totally not. I don't know why. Anyway, point being, God has placed you where you are to do his will and his work and to bring shalom to the place that he's placed you, to the opportunities he's given you. Now, this is a little tricky because you're like, yeah, but missionaries, don't they just walk around trying to tell people about Jesus? See, that's one of the misconceptions that we have of what missionaries do and what we're called to do as missionaries. Once we realize this truth, this reality, there are 3 important shifts that have to happen. 3 important shifts. Number 1, we have to understand their culture. We have to understand their culture. This is a little tricky because we live in the culture and we were raised in the culture and we breathe the culture, but we have to understand the culture that we have been called to. Rather than fight it, how do we interact with it in a way that brings light to that culture? Paul talked about being all things to all people. And this is, I struggle with this too sometimes. It's easy to make culture the bad guy. It's easy to say, kids these days, they just don't get it. They weren't raised the way that I was back in the day. And it's easy to blame culture's no good, and we need to fight against culture, and we need to have culture wars. But listen, we don't have to shake our fists at the way things are. Missionaries don't go to another country and then just get demoralized because of the culture that they're working in. They recognize it, they learn it, they understand it, and they try to use it in order to benefit the kingdom. How do I communicate to this culture? What are the customs and the values of this culture that I have been called to? What matters to them? If you imagine you were to remove yourself And you're like, I need to think about Minnesotans, and probably particularly Minnesotans that live in metropolitan areas. What motivates them? What offends them? What do they care about? What is interesting to them? How can I learn about the culture that I live in order to be a light? And maybe it's rural Minnesota. Maybe it's Wisconsin. They are very different over there. But if you need to learn about a particular culture, about a particular way, sorry for making all the Wisconsin jokes. It's just like low-hanging fruit. You know, Wisconsinites are great. They're great. They're wonderful. Paul even quoted local poets, local pagan poets in his sermons to make the point that he was trying to make about who God is in the world. We have to love and understand and adapt to and interact well with their culture. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, this is a little bit later than what we were reading, but Paul writes, whether you eat or drink. So just local practices, local customs. Whether you eat or drink or whatever you do it all to the glory of God. Do not cause anyone to stumble. And then he names different people groups. Don't cause the Jews to stumble, the Greeks, or even people in the church. Don't cause them to stumble. Even as I try to please everyone in every way. Quite a standard. For I am not seeking my own good, but the good of many, that they may be saved. What can we learn about the culture God has called us to? Secondly, how can we truly be dedicated to their good? See, this is the tricky part about being a missionary in the culture that you are raised in. We are tempted to be dedicated to our good. We want to vote so that people that we think like us will be in power. We want to change laws so that it makes us feel safe and feel comfortable. We want to do things that make us feel right or give us security or comfort or help us win arguments. But to genuinely love someone, you must be willing to give those things up for their good. Your comfort, your sense of safety, your security. You have to give those things up to be dedicated to their good. I can tell that, yeah. Some of you are like, I don't know. That's why I live here, because I want to be comfortable and safe and secure. That's not what God has called you to. 1 Corinthians 10:31, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. Do not cause anyone to stumble. Jews, Greeks, or Church of God, even as I try to please everyone anyway. For I am not seeking my own good, but the good of many, so that they may be saved. And then this last shift in our thinking that has to take place is so important, because I think this is where a lot of the church gets stumbled up. We have to be working for their shalom. We have to be working for their shalom. The last part of this verse, you'll notice he says, I'm not seeking my own good, but the good of many, that they may be saved. When we see the word saved, we just tend to think like, yeah, that's about people having their sins forgiven, having them washed away. That's what we got to celebrate in such a beautiful way a few weeks ago when Anna was baptized. A wonderful thing. We got to see a conversion. But we tend to reduce the concept of someone being saved to the notion of conversion or the notion of forgiveness of sins. And it's so much more than that. The same word right there, translated in 1 Corinthians 10:33 as saved, is also in the book of Mark, chapter 5, verse 23, where this father pleaded earnestly. Just imagine, parents, put yourself in these shoes. Pleaded earnestly with Jesus, my little daughter is dying. Please come, put your hands on her so that she will be healed. Same word, saved and healed. Because shalom is so much more than just that first stage of having someone's sins forgiven. It's the good of their whole life. It's elevating every part of who they are. This is sometimes why people who are outside of the church are suspicious of our offer of salvation, because we give them the impression that all we care about is that first step of forgiveness of sins, and we don't really care about the quality of their life. We're only interested in this one thing. This one thing is a huge thing. Jesus died on the cross. This is the gospel. This is the good news. But it's more than that. Shalom is a whole life transformation process. It's more than just the forgiveness of sins. That's just the first part of the restoration project of human flourishing. In fact, people, this is one of those scary verses. I'm going to show you. Jesus talks about Judgment Day in Matthew chapter 25. This is one of those you kind of want to buckle up, because if you're tuned in, you're going to be like, that makes me feel a little uncomfortable. Then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father. This is the day where we're separating, the sheep, the goats, you get all that, good, bad. Take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. And Jesus says, this is why you're getting to participate in this inheritance. I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, ooh, that's scary, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, you came to visit me. Nowhere in there does he say, I was a sinner, and you preached at me. Now, is that part of the interaction that we have with people? Absolutely, but it's only one part. Jesus cares about the whole person. It's the salvation of the whole life, not just this one element of it. We have to be dedicated. We have to care about their shalom. I was telling you about Hudson Taylor earlier. He and his team planted 418 churches in China. That's quite a few churches. But he also, and by estimates, there's about 20,000 Christians that were converted. There's about 80 million Christians in China. Kind of a hard thing to guess at because officially there's no, Chinese government isn't interested in a lot of churches being established, although there are some. But because it wasn't just about conversions for him, he actually started 150 schools. 150 schools, 10 hospitals, 68 clinics, and 50 drug rehabilitation clinics. Particularly, there was a problem with opium, and this was rehabilitation from opium because it was about the whole life, the whole person. Now, the danger in me telling you that about Hudson Taylor is you're like, well, I'm not going to move to China, and I'm not going to start 150 schools and 10 hospitals and 50 drug rehabilitation clinics. I'm not going to do any of that, so maybe I just won't do anything. I know we're not going to learn 5 dialects, we're not going to do any of that. That's why I love the first part of the verse that we just looked at, 1 Corinthians 10:31. So whether you eat or drink. Paul's saying, let's bring it down to the microscopic level, the everyday choices, the choices of what we eat and what we drink. We do that to the glory of God for the advancement of the kingdom, the simple things in life. You got to go eat. Why don't you invite someone to eat with you? You got to have breakfast. Hey, take your griddle out to the overpass. Make pancakes for the homeless people. You got to do that stuff anyways. Whether you eat or drink, do all to the glory of God. I think one of the things we have to realize, and I'm going to wrap up with this. In fact, I invite the praise team to come back up on stage, if they would. But I think one of the things we have to realize is that God, whether you recognize this or not, I believe it's true. God has placed you where he has placed you for his purposes. And I think most of us just kind of cruise through our normal work day, our normal work week. Just got to get through, just got to keep my head above water. And we're not interacting with our coworkers. We're not interacting with our classmates. We're not interacting with the vacation neighbors at our cabin, lake cabin, in a way that says, how can I be an agent for shalom in the world? How can I bring hope and healing through the even small choices that I make? And that's what I'm inviting our church to do, to participate, to think about the world in that way, that God is on a mission of shalom in the world. We get to participate, which means that we are missionaries. And what we're doing is we're bringing the future reality of heaven that someday will be a fact, and we're bringing it to our own little corner of the world. How can I elevate the people around me, the places around me? How can I make them just slightly better for God? Let's stand and we're going to sing this song called Hymn of Heaven one more time. Such a beautiful sentiment for this idea. Let's sing it together.